Hey there folks, welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture. And today we're finally going to be talking about the newest album from Epica called The Holographic Principle. So I don't tend to talk about critical trends all that often. As I've said before, critics all have their own distinct opinions, and if they're expressed particularly well, I can be understanding even if I disagree. But there is a trend among some critics, particularly among metal critics, that I want to address here, and that's the critical dismissal of almost the entire genre of symphonic metal. Oh, don't act like you haven't seen it. It can happen with power metal too, and it's just as exasperating there. It's often considered too cheesy, too melodramatic, or it's too poppy and accessible, doesn't try to be as complex as real metal bands. Frankly, I would like to say that we as metalheads probably should have moved on beyond this, but unfortunately that's obviously not the case. And if Evanescence ever follows up with their threat to release another album, I will explain why that bothers me in greater detail there. But look, it's not like those stereotypes and criticisms can't have a vein of truth. Sure, I can admit that. I've heard acts like Delane, I totally get it. But it also sells short a crop of symphonic metal acts that actually have more ambition and power than they're typically given credit for. So let's talk about one of the most underrated bands in the genre, Epica. Now, I'll admit it took me a while to come around on this group. Growing up, Nightwish and With Temptation were both a lot more accessible in their hooks, and Epica did take some time to refine down some solid melodies that I could really get into, but they're easily one of the most lyrically ambitious bands of any genre that I've covered, tackling big idea stuff with the sort of insight and depth that deserves a lot more attention. Easily as cerebral as most progressive metal bands can be. I still hold The Divine Conspiracy and Design Your Universe as fantastic albums, but in 2014, Epica finally managed to hit a real sweet spot with me with the Quantum Enigma, which had their best ever hooks and showed frontwoman Simone Simons finally bringing the dramatic presence in order to match it. It was also one of their most financially successful albums at highest charting, and given how they were describing their upcoming project, The Holographic Principle, as being even bigger, it looks like their label Nuclear Blast has seen that success as a chance to give them an even meatier budget and see what happens. And all the more promising was the thematic idea of exploring a universe as a digital hologram. Okay, not the most unique theme in sci-fi to explore, but Epica was bound to go deep with this and potentially could reconnect with the human drama that ultimately felt a little bit slight on the Quantum Enigma. So, okay, I was entirely on board with this as one of my most anticipated projects of 2016. Sorry it took me this long to get to it, I just had a lot of stuff on my plate, but what did we get with the Holographic Principle? Well, this is a tricky one for me to evaluate, and not just because the subject matter that demands you dig into the lyrics in depth. No, the Holographic Principle isn't nearly as immediate of a listen as the Quantum Enigma, aiming for more intricate symphonic complexity that comes with a bigger budget and more ambition. And I have to admit, there are definitely points where I feel that all that kind of gets away from Epica a little bit, enough that I'm not sure it's quite on the level of their best albums, despite being one hell of a record all the same. It is a great album, but I'm not quite certain it's an improvement, say, on the Quantum Enigma. So let's start off with the instrumentation and production, where it's very clear that Epica's ambitions have shown through the most. Make no mistake, these are some of the most elaborate and borderline cinematic compositions of their entire career, and by far some of their heaviest. The string section is massive, the horns bellow across the mix, the keyboards layer in additional melodies, and with a full choral vocal section, this is easily one of the largest symphonic backdrops the band has ever had to work with, and you can tell they're using all of it. And when you combine them with the thunderous crunching riffs that drive through it and drumming that alternates between being more progressive and even blast beat on Ascension, Dreamstain, Armageddon, you're getting a record where every moment of quieter atmosphere and respite is a moment that is cherished. And yet, as much as these riffs have a lot of impact and power and kind of awesome, you quickly realize that the main guitar line isn't often carrying the main melody that's driving these songs. It's often coming through in the horns or the strings or the backing symphony. And sure, that was often true with the Quantum Enigma, but the riffs being so much heavier and crunchier and having so much more texture, there are points where it feels like the rhythm section is competing with the melodies rather than complementing them, and that can kind of weaken some of your melodic hooks a little bit. And look, maybe I'm just more of a purist for metal, and especially in the more melodic vein, but I really do wish this album at least tried to put a main melody on a guitar line at some point beyond just the solos, which, yes, they're absolutely awesome and feature some of Isaac Delahay's best work yet, especially on songs like Universal Death Squad or Beauty Beyond the Matrix or the Cosmic Algorithm or the title track. Now that's not saying some of the melodies and hooks aren't catchy as hell here. Edge of the Blade might feel a little bit abortive on its hook, could have gone a little bit longer, and a Phantasmic Parade just kind of feels wonky all around. But by the time we hit Universal Death Squad with that phenomenal trumpet line and the grinding gallop of the groove, I'm definitely on board for this, especially for tracks with really strong hooks like Beyond the Matrix, the Cosmic Algorithm, and the huge climax we get on Dancing in a Hurricane. Now that's one of the few songs that brings in more Arabian-inspired flourishes in some of the tones and composition, which I'll admit normally aren't quite my thing, but Epica pulled them off pretty damn effectively. Arguably better than what Nightwish did back on Sahara on Dark Passion Play. And speaking of Nightwish, I was getting some of that vibe on the ballad Once Upon a Nightmare thanks to the focus on strings and piano and some of the vocals. But again, Epica, they knocked this out of the park, mostly because of their ridiculously solid control of their atmosphere. This is a strikingly cohesive project and the talents of Simone Simons. If anything, her job is even harder here than usual, given that she's now stuck competing with some even heavier riffs and the full backing choral vocals. And yeah, there are some points where the multi-tracking isn't quite thick enough to give her the presence in the mix that she needs, but when she does get it, like on the interlude of Beyond the Matrix, she sounds outright stunning, and her interplay with Mark Jansen's growls continues to work with real power, especially as the group takes advantage of the very different styles to accentuate different points in both the content and language of what they're saying. And this takes us to the lyrics and themes, and one of the big reasons I'm such a huge fan of this band. The lyrical depth, the overarching concept of a holographic universe, the idea that in a higher dimension we could just be considered a hologram for others to observe on a plane incomprehensible for human minds, that's the sort of thing that makes for a fun thought experiment in a physics class, but can be a little bit uninvolving on an emotional level. I mean, think about it. The most basic approach to this sort of idea is just to play the Matrix-esque paranoia and play as a sci-fi horror or a thriller, which, yeah, it's ideal for metal, but for lack of better words, it can feel kind of one-dimensional. But what I've always liked about Epica is that they do the follow-up. They hit that initial conclusion, just power right through it to the next steps. Universal Death Squad snaps to the question of AI, and if we're in a holographic projection, what this says about our own free will. And then they follow it with Divide and Conquer, snapping to real-world fighting in the Middle East, where the focus is again peeling back the layers to find the real motivation for control of that region, where the free will comes through, be it religious or more often just purely economic. Not only is the thematic core intact with this extrapolation, but they humanize the drama in finding the high concept, peel back the layers, understand your broader world with rationality and reason and focus, and if you're a part of that system, work to understand it. And while they don't shy away with showing the loss of innocence that comes with that sort of darker revelation upon Once Upon a Nightmare, it's also a tremendous liberating force to know that system around you. Once you get that cosmic algorithm, that system, you can see all the areas it can be bent to your will if you choose to do so. There's real potent undercurrent of optimistic humanism that runs through this album that initially kind of caught me off guard, but ultimately lends it a lot of invigorating force. There isn't a lot of fear here, and if there is, you're looking past it. It embraces its concept and then goes straight into the what now with such conviction you just get swept along for the ride. And it doesn't shy away from those bigger questions, like if we're just in this holographic projection, what does a soul really mean? Or what this means for free will? Or what could happen if we were able to perceive and break out of this particular dimensional experience? Now, in the last case, Epica suspects that it'd probably lead to some form of Armageddon or break the human mind into all sorts of pieces, and so the question then shifts a little bit. Do you allow yourself to be paralyzed by this existentialist crisis, or do you choose to live in what might be a dream, but it's one of your own making, it's one of your own perception, and one you can control, at least to some extent? Now, these are some out there big idea concepts, and I argue they're grounded in human emotion by cutting back to, say, the refugee crisis, or the conflicts in the Middle East in a way that the Quantum Enigma never really quite connected on that more visceral or even intimate level. But on the other hand, on a compositional level in terms of hooks and production, I do feel the holographic principle doesn't quite connect as strongly. It still is a great listen, but I get the feeling that having a greater symphonic budget and going even bigger might have led to some indulgence in spots. Pieces that could have been tightened or refined, like a little bit more symphonic release that was a little bit more dynamic and varied rather than as full force as it is all the time. And I have to admit, sometimes the melody does get lost in the shuffle, and that kind of blunts some of their hooks. But still, this is a great album that I really enjoyed. It's netting a light 8 out of 10 for me. If you're a symphonic metal fan, or hell, even if you're not, you're looking for some tremendously huge music with big ideas explored in depth, the Holographic Principle is the record that you've been looking for. Definitely check this out, you will not regret it. So yeah, yeah, thanks a lot for watching. Like to like and subscribe, I'd be more than grateful. I got the poll up here, so whatever you guys thought about this album, I'd be happy to hear about it. I'm definitely curious to see where some people fall in this in comparison with their earlier work. Beyond that, anything else I might be able to do to improve my presentation, I'm all ears. As I said, I got a lot of albums on my plate right now that I'm trying to pound through in my backlog. Just give me some time, folks. I'm getting through them as fast as I can. Till then, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.